Elias Hart stood on the front step of the house he once called home. The key felt cold in his hand, almost heavier than he remembered. The wind brushed past him, carrying the faint smell of pine and old wood, scents that had followed his childhood like shadows. He swallowed hard, then pushed the door open. The hinges let out a long, tired creak, as if the house itself recognized him but wasn't sure it wanted to. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated in thin beams of sunlight that squeezed through the blinds. The living room looked exactly the same as it had a decade ago, frozen, untouched, like time had stopped the moment he left. Elias stepped inside slowly. His shoes echoed on the wooden floor, each step a reminder of how empty the place truly was. His chest tightened as he scanned the room. The couch where his father used to fall asleep after long days of work sat unchanged. The framed photos on the wall hung crooked, their colors fading. A layer of dust coated everything, muting the memories that once lived here. He didn't want to feel anything, but he couldn't stop the sting in his chest. Coming back wasn't a choice. It was a task he needed to finish. Handle the estate. Sign the papers. Sort through the belongings. Leave. That was the plan. His father, Samuel Hart, had never made things simple. Even now, after death, Samuel felt like a problem Elias needed to solve instead of someone he could miss. Their relationship had been a tight, painful knot, Samuel demanding and silent, Elias always trying but never enough. Every harsh word, every disappointed look still lived somewhere deep inside him. Elias tried to shake it off. Just get it done, he muttered to himself. He headed down the hallway to the bedroom. The door stuck for a moment before giving way. The room smelled like old cologne and memories he didn't want. He began opening drawers, sorting clothes into boxes, moving quickly so the weight of the past wouldn't catch up to him. Then he saw them. Near the edge of the bed sat a pair of his father's shoes, polished, worn at the heel, neatly placed side by side. Something about them made him pause. They looked almost ready, like Samuel had just taken them off and would return any minute. Elias stared, a chill crawling up his spine. The house stayed silent, but he felt something shift, something he didn't understand yet. Elias didn't touch the shoes at first. He only stared at them, feeling a strange pressure in his chest, as if the room had suddenly grown smaller. The shoes looked harmless, simple leather, dark brown, worn down on the edges from years of labor. But there was something unsettling about how neatly they were placed, almost as if Samuel Hart had stepped out of the moments before Elias walked in. Finally, he crouched down and reached for them. The moment his fingers brushed the leather, a cold shiver ran up his arm. He pulled back instinctively, then frowned at himself. They're just shoes, he told his mind. Stop acting like a child. He tried again, gripping them firmly this time. But they felt heavier than they should, far heavier, as if something inside them was pushing back. He tightened his hold and lifted them, but the weight made him stumble to one side. A strange chill crawled over his skin. Dad, what were you made of? Lead? He muttered, trying to laugh it off. But it didn't feel funny. It felt wrong. He set the shoes on the bed, maybe a little quicker than he meant to, and wiped his hands on his jeans. The room felt colder. He didn't stay long. He moved on to the closet and continued sorting clothes, but every few minutes his eyes drifted back to the shoes, like he expected them to shift when he wasn't looking. By the time the sun set, Elias had done enough for the day. He shut the bedroom door behind him and tried to shake the tension out of his shoulders. The house creaked as he walked down the hallway. Normal old house sounds, but they bothered him more than usual. He heated a can of soup for dinner and sat at the small kitchen table. The silence felt loud. His mind kept returning to the shoes. You're tired, he told himself. Tired people imagine things. He finished eating, rinsed the bowl, and turned off the kitchen light. The house dropped into darkness, except for a small lamp in the hallway. Elias headed toward the guest room where he planned to sleep. Then he heard it, a soft thud, then another. Slow, rhythmic. His footsteps stopped. His breath caught in his throat. The sounds were coming from the hallway behind him. He turned slowly, his heart thudding harder than the noises themselves. The hall was empty. Shadows stretched along the walls, long and twisted in the dim light. He listened again. Thud. Pause. Thud. The sound of footsteps. Heavy ones. His stomach tightened. The footsteps seemed to move closer, even though nothing was there. "Hello," Elias called out, his voice thin. Silence answered him. Then, another thud. He forced himself to walk toward the noise. He reached the end of the hallway and stopped in front of his father's bedroom door. The door was open now. He didn't remember leaving it that way. He flicked on the light. The shoes were no longer on the bed. They were standing upright on the floor. Elias stared, frozen in disbelief. The shoes leaned slightly forward, like someone invisible was wearing them in mid-step. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the house was holding its breath with him. "Okay, this isn't real," he whispered. Then the shoes moved. Just one step, a small one, but enough. Leather bending, heel lifting, toe landing. A step. Elias stumbled back so quickly he hit the doorframe. His pulse roared in his ears. His mouth went dry. The shoes didn't move again. They only stood there, facing him, silent but unsettling, almost expectant. His chest tightened with something sharp, like anger mixed with fear. "Is this you?" he whispered into the empty room, his voice trembling. "Is this what you want? To scare me?" Even now, the words spilled out before he could stop them. Old feelings rushed up, memories of harsh lessons, raised voices, cold silences. He hated that part of him still jumped at the idea of his father watching over his shoulder. He backed away, unable to look at the shoes any longer. He flicked off the light, shut the door quickly, and stepped away from it as if something might burst through at any second. Back in the guest room, Elias sat on the edge of the bed with his hands pressed tightly together. His heart still pounded, and he tried to slow his breathing. "It's stress," he told himself. "It has to be stress. Grief, exhaustion, being in this house, it's messing with your head." But deep down, he wasn't convinced. He could still hear that quiet step echoing in his mind. And worse, he felt something else rising from the past. A simmering, bitter anger he thought he had buried years ago. "If this is your ghost," Elias whispered shakily to himself, "I swear I don't want anything from you." But even as he said it, he knew the house wasn't done with him, and neither were the shoes. Elias barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shoes taking that slow, steady step toward him. Even in the darkness of his room, he imagined hearing soft taps on the hallway floor. By morning, his body felt heavy with exhaustion. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. He walked down the hallway, expecting the bedroom door to be open again. But it was shut tight. He hesitated before touching the doorknob, half afraid the shoes would be waiting right behind it. Finally, he pushed the door open. The room looked the same as he had left it, except the shoes were no longer in the middle of the floor. They were placed neatly near the dresser, lined up side by side again, like nothing had happened. Elias's skin crawled. "You're not real," he whispered under his breath, but the words felt weak. He knew he couldn't ignore what he saw, so he did the only thing he could think of. He decided to watch, to see if the shoes moved on their own again. He sat down in the chair across the room and stared at them, waiting for any sign of life. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Just when he began to wonder if he had imagined everything, the shoes twitched. A small shift, barely a movement at all, but Elias saw it. His breath caught. The shoes turned, slowly, smoothly, toward the door. Where are you going?" he whispered, unsure why he was even speaking. Then they began to move. Not fast, not suddenly, but with purpose. A step, a pause, another step. Elias stood up, keeping his distance, watching with a mix of fear and curiosity as the shoes walked toward the doorway. When they reached the hall, they turned left, heading toward his father's study at the far end of the house. It felt impossible, but Elias followed. Each step he took was careful, tense. Part of him wanted to run. Another part needed answers. The shoes stopped in front of Samuel's old desk. Elias hadn't touched this room yet. The blinds were still closed, casting long stripes of light across the walls. Dust coated the shelves, the books, the tiny knickknacks Samuel kept from his days as a machinist. The air smelled like old paper and metal. Elias looked at the shoes, unsure what they wanted him to see. Then he noticed something strange. The lowest drawer of the desk wasn't fully closed. It sat slightly open, as if nudged from the inside. With a shaking hand, Elias pulled it open. Inside, he found a small wooden box containing old photographs, pictures he barely remembered. Him as a child sitting on Samuel's shoulders. Samuel smiling, actually smiling, at a young Elias holding a toy plane. A camping trip picture where Samuel's arm rested on Elias's back protectively. Elias's throat tightened. He reached deeper and found notebooks stacked under the photos. When he opened one, he realized it wasn't just a journal. It was his father's handwriting. Careful, sharp, heavy. Elias sat down slowly as he read the first few lines. They weren't work notes. They weren't reminders. They were thoughts, private thoughts, regrets. His father wrote about wanting to talk to Elias, wanting to understand him better, wanting to be better. He wrote about how he didn't know how to show love, how he feared being weak, how he hated the distance between them but didn't know how to fix it. Elias's hands shook. The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears he didn't want to let fall. He reached for another notebook. Inside were letters, each one addressed to him but never sent. Messages Samuel had written through the years. Apologies, memories, hopes for Elias's future. Elias covered his mouth, overwhelmed. For the first time, he saw a side of his father he had never imagined. A man trying, failing, hurting quietly behind his own walls. He lifted his head slowly. The shoes stood still beside him, angled slightly toward the desk, as if they had brought him here on purpose. For the first time since he arrived, Elias felt something new rise inside him. Not fear, not anger, but a painful, aching curiosity. Who was his father, really? And why did it feel like the answers were only beginning to reveal themselves? Elias stayed seated at the desk long after he finished reading the last of the letters. The room felt heavier, like the air itself was thick with all the words his father never said. His hands rested on the open notebook, but his eyes drifted toward the shoes standing quietly beside him. They didn't move now. They didn't twitch or shift. But Elias felt something from them, like a soft pull, a suggestion that there was more he needed to see. More truth hidden in the corners of this house. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a slow, shaky breath. If you're trying to show me something, he whispered into the room, I'm listening. As if responding, the shoes turned. Elias stiffened. The motion was smooth and steady, not sudden or threatening. They faced the doorway, then took one step forward. Elias stood from the chair, hesitating, but the shoes stepped again. Their pace was patient, almost gentle, like they wanted him to follow without fear. So he did. The shoes led him out of the study, down the hallway, past the old family photos on the walls. Each picture caught Elias's eye. The faded smiles, the stiff poses, the moments that seemed more distant now than ever. He wondered what his father saw when he looked at these same pictures. Pride? Pain? Regret? The shoes descended the narrow staircase to the basement, one step at a time. Elias paused at the top. The basement had always felt like another world, cold, dark, filled with the smell of oil and sawdust from years of Samuel's work. Samuel spent countless hours down there, building things with quiet focus. As a child, Elias had been too afraid to enter. As a teenager, too angry. As an adult, he never came back to look. Now he followed. Each stair groaned under his weight. The basement light flickered weakly when he pulled the cord. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor and crowded the shelves lined with old tools and unfinished woodwork. The shoes walked toward Samuel's old workbench and stopped in front of it. Elias stepped closer, the familiar scent of sawdust filling his nose. He brushed his fingers over the wooden surface, feeling the scratches and marks left from years of use. Then he saw it, sitting on the center of the bench, covered in dust, with the pieces of something small. Thin wooden panels, tiny gears, metal screws, and delicate carvings. Elias leaned over to look closer. When he brushed away the dust, the shape became clear. It was a music box, or at least the beginning of one. A folded sheet of paper lay beneath the pieces. He opened it carefully. On it was a rough sketch, a design of the finished box. His father had drawn the layout and added notes in the margins. The handwriting was tight, focused, but shaky in some places like Samuel had written it during one of his weaker days. At the bottom of the sketch, Elias found something simple but powerful. For Elias, his breath hitched. He sat down on the old stool, the sketch trembling in his hands. So this was what his father spent his final months working on. A gift, an attempt to reach out, a final message he never got to deliver. Elias ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "Why didn't you just say it?" he whispered. "Why didn't you talk to me while you still had the chance?" The only response was the hum of the dim light above him. He reached for one of the carved panels, turning it in his hand. The moment he touched it, the basement filled with a sudden, sharp sound. Clink, scrape, tap, tap, tap. Elias froze. The sounds were familiar. Too familiar. They were the sounds of Samuel's tools. The hammer striking lightly. The metal file dragging against wood. The steady, rhythmic tap of sandpaper smoothing the surface. But the workbench was still. No tools moved. No hands shaped the wood. The sounds continued anyway. Elias's heart pounded. He looked around the basement, but nothing was there except the memories trapped in the walls. Then he realized the sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, as if the room itself remembered. A wave of emotion surged through him. Fear, sadness, longing all twisted together. The sounds grew louder, surrounding him, until he could almost picture his father standing at the bench again, shoulders hunched, face focused, hand working hard even when his body was failing. Elias pressed a hand over his mouth as tears filled his eyes. The past he tried to leave behind was rising around him, too real to ignore. "I didn't know," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know you were trying." The moment he spoke, the sound softened, faded, until the basement was silent again. Elias lowered his head, letting the tears fall freely now. He wasn't crying just for his father, but for himself, for all the years lost, for all the words they never said. The shoes stood quietly beside him, close enough to feel like a presence, but not close enough to threaten him. For the first time, Elias didn't see them as something dark. He saw them as something burdened, something trying to make things right. He rested both hands on the unfinished music box pieces, letting the weight of everything settle into his heart. "I hear you," he whispered. And for the first time since he arrived, he truly meant it. Elias stayed in the basement longer than he meant to. The quiet felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting for him to move. When he finally stood, wiping the last of his tears from his face, the shoes shifted slightly, just enough to draw his attention. They didn't step forward. They didn't twitch in a threatening way. They simply turned, angling toward the stairs. Elias swallowed. "You want me to follow again?" he murmured. The shoes lifted one step, then the other, and began climbing the stairs. Elias hesitated for only a moment before trailing behind. His legs felt tired, but there was something inside him pushing him onward, a need to see whatever came next. As the shoes reached the main floor, they paused in the hallway. Elias waited, heart thudding quietly, until they started moving again, this time toward the living room. The room looked exactly as it had the day he returned. Old couch, crooked pictures, dusty shelves. But the moment the shoes entered, the atmosphere shifted. Elias didn't know how to explain it, but it felt like someone else had stepped into the room with him. Not seen, just sensed. The shoes walked to the center of the living room and stopped. Then, slowly, they began to move again. Not forward this time. Not toward anything in particular. They moved in a pattern Elias recognized. The shoes took a few steps toward the window, turned, paced back toward the fireplace, paused, then paced again. A short route, repeated, over and over. Steady, rhythmic. Elias stared, stunned. "That's..." "Dad," he breathed. He remembered that pattern. As a kid, he would watch his father walk that same path every night. Thinking, pacing, carrying worries he never shared. That pacing always made the house feel tense, like something bad was coming. Young Elias never understood it. He only felt the fear of something unsaid. Now he understood. "This is what you did when you didn't know how to talk," Elias whispered, his voice soft. The shoes shifted direction. They walked toward the hallway. Elias followed. In the hallway, they repeated another familiar pattern. his father's late-night pacing when arguments had built up too high, when Samuel wanted to knock on Elias's door but never did. The shoes paused in front of that very door. Elias stared at the wood grain, remembering the nights he lay on the other side, angry and anxious, waiting for a knock that never came. "You wanted to come in," Elias said quietly. "But you didn't." The shoes turned, stepping away from the door. They walked toward the kitchen next. Elias trailed behind, feeling memories rise like fog. His father standing by the counter early in the morning, making his silent cup of coffee. Elias had always taken that quiet as coldness. Now, watching the shoes, he wondered if it was just fatigue or fear of saying the wrong thing. The shoes paused at the sink. They angled toward the window above it. Elias realized this was where his father would stand before work, staring out at the backyard as if searching for something he couldn't name. A sadness deeper than fear washed over Elias. "You weren't trying to be cruel," he whispered. "You just didn't know how to be anything else." The shoes moved again, slower now, guiding him one last time toward the living room armchair. Samuel's armchair, the one that still held the faint shape of his father's body. When the shoes reached the chair, they stopped. This time, they didn't twitch. They didn't shift direction. They simply rested at the foot of the chair, toes pointing toward it, like someone had finally taken a seat after years of standing. Elias stood across from them, breathing hard. His heart ached with a deep, complicated pain, anger, regret, love, confusion, all tangled together. He stepped closer. "Is this your apology?" he asked softly. "All those years, is this you trying to say you're sorry?" The silence wrapped around him like a blanket, but the stillness of the shoes felt like an answer. Elias let out a shaky breath. His eyes burned again. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I thought you didn't care. I thought I wasn't enough for you." He sank onto the couch, staring at the shoes, at the chair, at the empty space where his father used to sit. And for the first time, he didn't feel haunted. He felt seen. The house was still, quiet, full of memories that hurt but finally made sense. Elias leaned back, letting the truth settle into him. His father hadn't been trying to scare him. He had been trying to reach him. That night, the house felt different, heavier, as if every memory that had been stirred awake during the day now clung to the walls, watching Elias from every corner. He tried to sleep, but the silence wouldn't let him. It pressed against him, thick and restless, until he finally got up and walked into the hallway, the floorboards cold beneath his feet. The shoes were no longer by the armchair. A chill rolled through him. He scanned the dark living room, but they weren't there. Not in the kitchen, not in the study. His heartbeat quickened. He found them standing at the top of the basement stairs, facing downward, waiting. Elias swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to turn away. But he couldn't, not now. Not after everything the shoes had shown him. He reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered out the moment he touched it, leaving the stairway swallowed in shadows. The shoes began to descend, one slow step at a time. Elias followed, gripping the railing as fear and determination twisted inside him. The air grew colder the deeper he went, until he reached the basement floor, where only the faint outline of the shoes was visible in the low glow coming from the small window near the ceiling. They moved again, this time toward the old workbench. The same bench where his father had spent countless hours fixing machines, crafting parts, and hiding thoughts he never shared. Elias stepped closer, his breath shaky. Something was on the workbench now. Something he was sure hadn't been there earlier. A small metal box. Its lid was half open, as if waiting for him. Elias approached slowly. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid the rest of the way. Inside was a tape recorder. He froze. There was a cassette already loaded, labeled in Samuel's sharp handwriting. For Elias. If I never find the courage to say it myself. Elias's knees nearly buckled. He stared at the recorder, unable to breathe. "No," he whispered. "Dad, you left this?" The shoes remained still, angled toward the box, like they were urging him to continue. With a shaking finger, Elias pressed the play button. Static filled the room. Then a voice, broken, low, uncertain, echoed through the basement. Samuel's voice. "Elias, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, Elias's chest tightened until he thought it might crack. I'm not good at talking. You know that. Maybe you always did. I made mistakes. Too many. And I don't know how to fix them. But I want you to know, I see you. I've always seen you. Elias pressed a hand over his mouth, tears already slipping down his cheeks. You didn't deserve the silence I gave you. You didn't deserve my anger, my distance. You deserved a father who knew how to love out loud. I wish I knew how. The shoes didn't move. They didn't need to. Elias could feel their message. He sank to the floor as the tape continued. If I never get to say it to you, if something happens before I can, I am proud of you, and I am sorry. The tape clicked off. Silence fell heavy, thick with everything their lives had left unsaid. And Elias broke. For the first time since his father's death, he cried, not out of anger, but out of the unbearable weight of love that had never found its voice. The storm outside finally broke at dawn. Rain tapped gently against the windows, replacing the harsh wind from the night before. Elias sat at the basement workbench, eyes burning from hours of crying and reading. Samuel's journals lay open beside him, page after page of regrets, hopes, and words his father never spoke aloud. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt honest. Elias wiped his face with the back of his hand and took a deep breath. His gaze drifted toward the unfinished wooden music box, still spread out in pieces on the bench. Samuel had carved the sides with quiet care, tiny patterns that looked like waves, each line steady and patient. The lid was unfinished, its edges rough as if Samuel had stopped mid-sanding. Elias touched one of the wooden panels. It felt warm, even in the cool basement air. I guess you wanted to finish this, he whispered. For me. The shoes stood a short distance away, silent and still. They no longer carried the tense energy they once held. They didn't press him forward or drag him through memories. They simply waited, lighter somehow, like the weight inside them had eased. Elias picked up the small carving tool lying beside the scattered pieces. His hands were clumsy at first. He had never been good with woodwork, but he kept going. Slowly, carefully, like Samuel must have done. Okay, Dad, he murmured. Let me try. The basement filled with soft sounds, scraping wood, the faint hum of rain outside, the gentle rhythm of Elias's breathing. There was no supernatural whisper pushing him, no ghost guiding his hands. Only memory, only understanding, only a quiet kind of love that had taken years to rise to the surface. Piece by piece, the box came together. Sanded edges, fitted joints, a small hinge Samuel had picked out but never attached. Elias paused before placing the final piece, the lid. His fingers trembled, but not from fear this time, from meaning. When he closed the lid and turned the small metal key inside, the gears clicked softly, and then a tender melody began to play. Simple, gentle, a tune that sounded like hope and apology woven together. Elias's breath caught in his chest. His eyes blurred again, but he didn't look away. He let the music wash through the room, through the empty spaces in his heart, through the years of silence that had once felt unbreakable. I forgive you, he whispered. The music continued, light and calm. And I hope you forgive me too. For the first time since returning home, Elias felt something shift inside him, like a knot he'd carried for years finally loosened. He looked over at the shoes. They hadn't moved, but something about them had changed. They no longer seemed heavy or watchful. They looked like ordinary shoes again, just leather and laces worn by a man who had tried, failed, tried again, and then run out of time. Elias stood up slowly. Thank you, he said to them, unsure if he was speaking to the shoes, the memory of his father, or the version of Samuel he'd only just come to understand. The shoes didn't answer. They didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. As the soft melody faded, Elias closed the music box, holding it gently in both hands. For the first time since stepping into the house, he didn't feel trapped. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel haunted. He felt ready, ready to move forward, ready to carry the truth, ready to let love be louder than regret. Morning light poured into the house, soft and warm, washing over the walls that once felt tight and shadowed. Elias stood in the center of the living room with two items in his hands, The wooden music box he had finished, and the pair of his father's shoes, now quiet, ordinary, but deeply changed in meaning. The house no longer felt like a prison of old hurts. It felt like a place where things had been faced, spoken, and finally understood. Elias walked to the bedroom one last time, checking that everything was packed. The boxes were sealed, the closets emptied, and the memories, both good and painful, had been sorted in their own way. He slipped the music box carefully into his bag. Then he held the shoes for a moment, their leather cool against his palms. He could have left them behind. He could have walked away and pretended none of this had happened. But he didn't want to. These shoes were no longer symbols of Samuel's distance. They were proof of his effort, his regret, and the love he never quite learned how to express. Elias carried them out to the car. Before leaving town, he made one final stop. The small cemetery sat on a hill just outside the neighborhood. The grass was damp from last night's storm, the air fresh and sharp. Elias found his father's grave, a simple stone with Samuel Hart's name etched plainly into it. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, not from anger, but from something gentler. He set the shoes beside the headstone and knelt down. "Dad," he began softly, "I read everything. I know the truth now." The breeze moved lightly through the trees, almost like a quiet acknowledgement. "I'm not angry anymore," Elias continued. "I wish we had talked. I wish we understood each other sooner. But I'm glad I came back. I'm glad I found what you left for me." His eyes warmed with emotion, but he didn't hold it back this time. "I forgive you, and thank you for loving me, even when it was hard for you to show it." He placed a hand on the shoes for a final moment, then stood. He didn't take them off the grass. They didn't need to follow him anymore, but he carried their meaning with him. Elias walked back toward the road, the morning sky bright above him. He felt lighter, stronger, ready. He stepped forward wearing his own shoes, the music box safe at his side, his father's memory no longer a weight, but a quiet guide toward the life waiting ahead. A new path finally opened.